thank you, Ken. It's a real honor to be here. I want to tell you a little bit first about the place that I'm from, the Institute for Creative Technologies at USC. It actually got its start when some folks in the Department of Defense were looking at some video games. They said, gee, you know, these video games, they're actually pretty engaging. They're pretty compelling. In fact, in some ways, they're better than these simulators that we in the military spend millions of dollars on every year and run on computers the size of refrigerators. Would there be something to be gained by getting folks in the entertainment industry to talk to people who understand the technology? And so that really is the whole idea behind the ICT. It's basically set up to be a center where people who understand the technology of simulation can work together with people who understand the entertainment aspects, how to create a story that people find compelling, how to create characters that people find engaging. And by working together to create synthetic experiences that are very compelling and very real. So when the ICT was started up by the US Army about 7 years ago, and shortly after, you know, we had a big kickoff ceremony and all that sort of stuff, basically some folks from Washington came out and said, well, you know, gee, what we would really like you to build us is something like the holodeck. And we thought, oh, well, you know, that's great. Now, they were speaking metaphorically, I have to say. So they said, you know, what they really want is something that has some of the aspects of the holodeck, but not, you know, a real holodeck. After all, you know, there's only one holodeck per starship and all that. So, you know, and there aren't any starships. So this was kind of an issue. But really, for us, it's been, you know, the holodeck is, for those of you who don't know, is from the Hollywood series Star Trek, and it's a place on board a starship where you can go and experience other worlds, other periods in history, interact with virtual characters who respond to you, all of that. And we thought this was great because it actually gives us guidance in terms of a number of research vectors that we would like to explore. The other thing that we thought was really great about this is that, of course, Star Trek is set in the 24th century. So we figured it would be a long time before anyone was coming around asking for any deliverables. This turned out not to be the case, actually. So, okay, so if you were going to build a holodeck or something like a holodeck, what would you need? Well, I'd argue one thing you need is very good 3D computer graphics, so photoreal graphics. Big area for us. Another thing is you need the actual environment, the immersive environment that's going to surround participants and that they're going to be able to walk through and experience this virtual reality. And then a third thing that you're going to need is something that's going to behave in this environment. You need virtual humans, computer-generated characters that will interact with you and use artificial intelligence to figure out how to respond. Ultimately, what we would like to do is basically dealing with one of these virtual humans should be much like dealing with a real person. So you talk to them, they understand what you're saying, they talk back to you, they understand nonverbal as well as verbal responses that you make and exhibit them themselves. So that's another big area of research for us. And the fourth area is really putting, and this is really where the Hollywood piece is so important, is putting together a compelling scenario, a good story that will engage the participants, engage their emotions, and get them cause them to really be engaged with the simulation as it's going forward. So I'd like to go through these 4 different areas and tell you about some of the work that we're doing in them. So the first area is photoreal graphics. And this is work that's being done by the ICT Graphics Lab. Paul Debevec is the head of that group. And the basic idea, or the goals for this lab, are first to advance the state-of-the-art in computer graphics to produce very realistic virtual environments, virtual characters, and allow the integration of real objects, of photographs you may take out there that can be then incorporated into a digital model, as well as synthetic objects, and have them all look seamlessly integrated together. So nothing sticks out like a sore thumb, but it all looks like it was all there, part of the original scene. And of course, if you go to a Hollywood film, actually, now, you can see really good graphics, computer graphics. And in fact, most major films that you go to now, even if it looks like most of the action is live action, there's probably a good component of what's going on that is, in fact, computer-generated graphics. Now, the one catch is that Hollywood has enormous budgets for doing this, and they have a phalanx of digital artists. If you ever stay to the end of an actual major movie and watch all the credits, you know, all 15 to 20 minutes worth of credits, you see a lot of digital artists there at the end. I've done it, you know. In LA, we have to stay. It's kind of required. You have to stay to the end of the movie. But I understand other parts of the country it's different. Anyway, we want to do this without requiring those kinds of budgets, that kind of time investment, and do it rapidly and make it quickly reconfigurable. So I want to start with some of the first work that Paul and his group did on a system called Facade. And as I have said, most of the time when you see a 3D computer model, it's something that's put together by digital artists. So they're working away, creating this. Usually what they do is they render out. If you're going to create this room, for example, you would create a lot of little polygons that get rendered by the computer to produce the image. This is very time-consuming, both from the standpoint of actually generating the image, and it's also very time-consuming from the standpoint of the computer to actually render it out. So the question that Paul asked is, could you actually use photographs to speed up this process? Suppose you go out, you take a bunch of photographs of a scene. Could we then put together some tools that would allow us to much more rapidly build a 3D model? So basically, here's an example of some photographs that he took of a building, and he put together a tool that then, by outlining the major features of the building, allows him to construct a comparatively simple 3D model of that environment. And then, to make it look real, what you do is you take the photographs and wrap them, like wrapping paper, around the building so that you have all of the detail. Now, the advantage of this is, first of all, it's a lot faster to put these things together. And secondly, rendering it is a lot quicker as well. So here's a little video that shows how this works, I think, kind of dramatically. It's a video about building a model of the UC Berkeley campus, which is where Paul got his PhD. And this is the Campanile, which is the central tower on campus there. And so we start here with some photographs that he took by flying a camera on a kite around the tower, and then climbed up on the tower and took some photographs of the environment. From these, he was then able to derive this kind of simple 3D model. Now, when you add in the textures, you can see how the whole thing just really comes alive. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Now, suppose, though, that you want to stick into this environment some synthetic objects. You know, we've got some objects that we're imagining, and we're just going to put them into the environment. Well, the problem is, most of the time when you do that, they sort of look ugly and sort of stick out like sore thumbs. So here's a bunch of synthetic objects that are completely computer rendered, but they don't look like they belong in any natural or real world sort of environment. And the problem is the lighting. There's just one single point source of light that's used to illuminate this. And if you want to make them look seamless into an environment that you've captured using photographs, you basically got to understand what the lighting conditions were in that scene. So Paul came up with this actually really very clever idea, which is to take a silver ball, much like people used to have in their gardens in the backyard, stick it in the scene, and take a photograph of it. In fact, take several photographs of it because the dynamic range of light is very big. And then because this ball has a 180-degree field of view, you can see where the highlights are in the lighting space, where the light's coming from, what intensity it is, and what color it is. And then from that, you can then render out these synthetic objects you've got, and hopefully they will look like they really belong in the scene. So here's a bunch of different lighting environments that he captured using the silver ball. One is in a eucalyptus forest near Stanford. One is in Grace Church Cathedral in San Francisco. Another one's on the beach, and one is outside the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. Paul gets to travel all over doing this stuff. But anyway, when you use that kind of a lighting environment, you can see how all of a sudden these things plausibly look like they were really there, okay, even though they weren't. Now, okay, so that's great. So now we can take, photographs, take synthetic objects, put them into the environment. Now, suppose you want to stick people into the environment, okay? Well, now that's more of a problem because we don't really have good ways of rendering people that are completely synthetic. So you probably have to start with real people and figure out a way of sticking them into the environment. So in fact, Paul put together a system called the light stage. The way this works, what this is you see the guy seated on the chair there, and there's a hoop behind him. The hoop has a whole bunch of strobes, photo strobes mounted on it. And the whole hoop, when this is in operation, turns. And as it's turning, the strobes are firing in sequence. And there's a video camera, which you see over here, that's taking a high-speed image of the whole thing as this is happening. The effect is that basically you get this person illuminated from all possible directions. And the camera is recording that. That gives you a database of what this guy looks like illuminated from all these different directions. And then you can take that database together with the lighting model that you've got, use the additive property of light, and render the person in a wide variety. You take an image of the person once using this hoop device, and then you can render him in an arbitrary number of different environments. So now we can place somebody into this environment. Now the problem with this is, yes, it's photoreal, but it's static. You have to sit very still on that chair while the big hoop is going around. And the question is, would there be a way to actually start to capture a moving performance of people? And this is actually some of our latest work at the ICT. This is a system called Light Stage 6. Light Stage 6 is a big, about 10-meter in diameter geodesic dome that has high-speed LEDs, very bright LEDs mounted all over it. And these flash on and off in a particular pattern. And we film the person doing his performance at a frame rate of about 1,000 frames a second. So about every 30th of a second, which is standard video rate, we are getting the person illuminated from about a little less than 40 different directions. This allows us to then place the person into arbitrary scenes, but in a moving sort of way. Here's a video that shows how this works.
In this video, we present an image-based technique for capturing video of human locomotion that can be rendered under both novel viewing and lighting conditions. We capture imagery of a person walking on a slowly rotating treadmill inside a time multiplex lighting apparatus. As the person walks, their appearance is recorded with a vertical array of high-speed cameras, capturing different lighting conditions at approximately 1,000 frames a second. In about 40 seconds, 36 walk cycles are captured at 10-degree increments relative to the cameras. The lighting sequence repeats 30 times per second and includes 26 basis lighting conditions, 3 tracking frames, and 3 matte frames. The complete dataset contains 108 viewpoints of a 7-dimensional dataset spanning time, lighting, viewpoint, and image space. With the flowed reflectance field, we can render the subject into virtual or real-world environments. Here we see our subject rendered into an image-based lighting environment using basic geometry to predict the illumination at the subject position and to receive shadows. The second animation shows a second subject rendered into a 3D environment computed with global illumination. The rendered lighting environments used to light the subject are shown in the lower right. The lighting on the subject and the shadows beneath her change accordingly as she moves through the environment. This third animation shows a running subject rendered into another image-based lighting environment. This final animation shows several instances of a running subject in a different environment.
Okay, so now we've got, we're now able to take people doing performances, capture them into these three-dimensional 3D graphic worlds. Now, how can we think about presenting this to people, to making an immersive environment that will allow people to actually participate in experiences? And that's the project of a project we call the Flat World project. And you'll see why it's called Flat World in a moment. The idea is to create an environment that will stimulate all our senses, sound, smell, sight, allow participants to move about freely in the environment, and to allow both groups as well as individuals to be in the environment. Now, there have been a number of attempts to create immersive environments, such as using head-mounted displays, which is where you wear something on your head and there are little goggles that you look through that are actually TV screens. There's a thing called the cave. The problem with these environments has been that it's actually hard to physically walk around in the environment. If you're wearing a head-mounted display, it is tracked, and as you move around, the display will change. But what they don't show you is that there's actually a big cable coming off the back of the head-mounted display, and a couple of graduate students who are coming along behind you to make sure you don't trip over anything. And so if you imagine now using this for the Army, and they're going to be doing some sort of tactical drill, you can see how this might not be so good. The other thing is that if you've got this display on and you're rehearsing with a group of other people, the people that you're rehearsing with, you can't actually see them unless they are rendered as avatars in the field of view that you've gotten, so that complicates things a lot. So we really wanted to overcome these kinds of problems, and it led to this idea of Flat World. And the idea is basically to combine some ideas in computer-generated imagery together with stagecraft ideas. So the idea here is, imagine a warehouse-sized environment. And in this environment, we're going to put down flats, much like you might put on a stage. But these aren't just any old flats. These are actually digital flats. So they have projectors and projection surfaces that can be used to duplicate any environment that you might want to be in. Here's a video that shows how this...
In film and theatrical productions, sets are constructed using modular components called flats. Flats can be painted and molded to represent a variety of interior and exterior structures. Borrowing from these set construction techniques, the Flat World project addresses current virtual reality limitations by creating a system of digital flats. The system consists of projection screens, digital projectors, and physical props. Users can touch and open these portals to view an exterior virtual world, for example. Furthermore, by drawing upon techniques learned from the theme park industry, the Flat World experience is enhanced through the use of immersive audio, stereoscopic graphics, and 4D sensory effects such as blowing wind and vibrating floors. Because of their modular characteristics, several digital flats can be rapidly assembled in any open space. The system is also scalable, capable of simulating a variety of spaces from a single room to an entire building or city block. In Flat World, users have free range of motion within the virtual space. Using a semi-transparent screen material, this flat is capable of presenting virtual characters, explosions, and vehicles, which can be viewed mixed into a live view of another physical space. This paraholographic imagery is convincingly overlaid onto a user's view without the use of glasses or head-mounted displays. Flatworld's approach of using physical props within a virtual environment creates a mixed reality world where the physical and the virtual seamlessly coexist. Welcome to Flat
World. The next area I want to talk about is the area of building virtual humans. Building characters that are computer-generated characters, and the goal here is to make these characters be almost human in their behavior. So specifically, what I mean by that is we want them to be able to fully perceive the environment that they're in. So be able to listen to what people say in the environment, but also be able to, through the use of video, be able to perceive gestures that people might make or expressions on their face, if they're angry, if they're happy, whatever, and react appropriately. We want them to interact using both verbal and nonverbal communication, manipulate the environment. The next point, exhibit emotions, is actually, it turns out to be a critical one. One of the things that we've found in constructing these characters is as soon as you put something that looks like a person up on the screen, people will ascribe emotions to it, whether you've modeled them or not. And in fact, we've had the situation that sometimes there's been some bugs in our code, and you'll have a character up on the screen, and the character will hesitate for a really long time before responding to you. Now, people looking at that have said, oh, I know what's going on. This character is actually extremely upset with you, and it's trying to figure out if it's going to tell you off or not before it responds. Now, nothing like that was going on, but in fact, it told us that basically we had to play this game. We had to model emotions. The other interesting thing about this is that this is actually, for AI, a comparatively unexplored area. I would say, even though AI has been going on for over 50 years now, most of the work that's been involved in AI has really been concerned with essentially building a very smart computer. So essentially building Mr. Spock, good guy to have on your team, very smart, but no emotions, and basically an alien. Okay, so this has been one of the things that also, as I'll talk about in a moment, is we've actually found that modeling emotions allows us to solve certain kinds of problems in artificial intelligence that are difficult to solve if you just look at them from one particular perspective by itself. So some of the other things involved here also are modeling beliefs of their own beliefs as well as others, and doing the whole thing, bringing it all together in a sort of integrated fashion. Now, I want to give you an idea of sort of where we started from. There was some work in virtual humans even 10 years ago or 9 years ago, but it was fairly primitive.
Okay. Let me show you how to perform the pre-start procedure. Always perform this procedure before starting the compressor to make sure everything is in working order.
Okay, so this was actually state-of-the-art in around 1998, but it's kind of got some problems. There's a few things missing from the characters, and the voice it definitely sounds like one of those primitive synthesized voices. So you'd like to do a little better than that. So one of the projects that we did at the ICT was called the Mission Rehearsal Exercise Project, and this the scenario here is set in Bosnia. And the idea is that the trainee, the person interacting with the system, is a lieutenant in the Army, and these are basically soldiers in his platoon. They're on a mission to reinforce another platoon that's dealing with some civil unrest in the town. And as they're going there, one of their Humvees gets involved in an accident with a local civilian car, and then basically the lieutenant has some decisions to make. Does he stop and render aid? Does he continue on? How does he deal with the unrest at in this other area? And the idea here is really to try to use these simulations to put people into dilemmas that they might very plausibly encounter when they go out on a mission, but do it in a simulation before they actually are making real decisions in the real world. So we can make mistakes when you're in simulation that are much easier to fix than if you make them in reality. So here's a video that showed how that system worked.
What happened here?
There was an accident, sir. This woman and her son came from the side street and our driver didn't see them.
Who's hurt?
Our driver and the boy.
Moments ago, this platoon was en route to reinforce a unit dealing with a civil disturbance, and may have created a new disturbance all on its own. What should this lieutenant do? Stop and render aid, or continue on with his mission? But maybe the real question is, what could we have done to prepare this soldier for unexpected problems like these?
Where you are going? My boy needs help.
Advances in simulation technology will make it possible for soldiers to interact with virtual humans. These prototypes at USC's Institute for Creative Technologies hold the promise of a rich, complex interaction at a fraction of the cost of live role players.
What happened here?
There was an accident, sir. This woman and her son came from the side street, and our driver didn't see them.
Tucci, how is the boy?
The boy has critical injuries, sir. Sir, we need to get a medevac in here ASAP.
Eagle 26, this is Eagle 16. We're downtown, we've got a riot. You were supposed to be here, where are you?
Sergeant, send 2 squads forward.
From speech recognition, the system forms an internal representation of human speech. This maps against a knowledge model of the situation, including a general understanding of tactics, techniques, and procedures. By this means, the system can serve as a coach, offering suggested courses of action.
Sir, that is a bad idea. We shouldn't split our forces. Instead, we should send 1 squad to recon forward.
Finally, these characters include a basic emotional model to make their behavior more human-like and thus more believable. Their emotional states can be adjusted to offer an infinitely varied interactive experience.
Let's run it again, but this time make the sergeant more defensive.
Okay. Sergeant, what happened here?
They rammed into us, sir. They just shot up from the side street, and our driver couldn't see them.
Virtual humans such as these are still research prototypes. But in the not-too-distant future, they will give soldiers the training they need to succeed in a constantly challenging world.
Eagle 26, this is medevac 2-1, turning final now, have LZ in sight.
Okay, so actually making something like this work, as you might expect, involves bringing together a lot of different research projects and having them all seamlessly interact. I'm going to, because I was saying that emotions is kind of a relatively new area, I'm going to focus on that area and how we're doing that. The approach we take to modeling emotions is based on a psychological theory called Appraisal Theory. And it's basically the idea behind it is that we are constantly evaluating what's going on in the world out there and comparing that to our own goals and beliefs and desires and seeing if there is congruence or dissonance between them. So, if you find yourself here, but where you'd really like to be is there, there's going to be some tension. You're going to be kind of upset. And that's really the idea behind appraisal theory. You're constantly appraising what's really going on and comparing that to what you'd like to have happen. So we've basically incorporated that into a computer model that does the appraisal. The system has a model of the plans and goals that it has, the characters have, and those have utilities associated with them. And then as things happen in the world, these get appraised to produce an appraisal. And the appraisal uses variables like desirability. Is this a desired thing that's happened? Is it expected? Can I control it? Can I blame somebody else for it? Those are the kinds of things that, that go into these evaluations. Now, from these appraisal variables, we then derive what might be thought of as conventional emotions like anger, sadness, fear, and so forth. So basically, if something is undesirable, not controllable, and uncertain, that will tend to lead to a feeling of fear. If something is undesirable and certain, in other words, it's happened, that tends to lead to a feeling of sadness. And if it's undesirable and you can blame it on somebody else, that will lead to a feeling of anger often. So now, to make this more specific, let's look at this from the standpoint of the sergeant in the platoon sergeant in the video we just saw. Well, he would basically like for the child to be healthy, but that's not true. That's false. He's been injured. The other problem he's got is that the blame for this accident is unresolved. So those two things together lead to a significant feeling of distress on the part of the sergeant. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the value of integration. As I said earlier, making something like this virtual human work requires bringing together lots of different technical threads. And if you think about it, normally when we do science, what we do is we take a general problem and decompose it into a smaller problem and into a yet smaller problem. And finally, we have something that we can actually make progress on, and then we sort of trickle it all back up. Well, that's a great approach. But one issue with it is sometimes by focusing in very narrowly, you miss out on knowledge that, if you had it, would make the problem easier to solve. So one of the things that we've found in bringing together all these different research threads is that sometimes there are situations where there are kinds of problems that have been particularly difficult, but that we can actually solve because we now have many more resources available to do that. Let me give you an example of that. It's a problem from computational linguistics. It's the problem of resolving the focus of an ambiguous question. Okay, here's the question.
What happened here?
Okay, now, to us, the answer to that is obvious, right? There was an accident. Totally straightforward. If, however, you are a computer, there's a lot of things that have happened, and the answer isn't so obvious. Okay, all of a sudden, it's a little more difficult, isn't it? Okay, well, in fact, people who work in computational linguistics have identified this problem. They, definitely, it's a well-researched problem. And basically, the primary solution or heuristic to solving this that they suggest following is the idea of using recency. Look at the thing that happened most recently. That's probably the thing that's in focus. It's actually a good idea and a good heuristic. In this case, however, it gives you the wrong answer. Okay. Well, what we realized, though, was that, in fact, we may have a much better mechanism because we have an emotional model. And think about it. What do emotions do? Well, one of the things they definitely do is they focus attention on things. And if you think about it, there's this phenomenon called, the Freudian Slip, which is where somebody blurts out something because usually that they don't want to blurt out, but because they're obsessing about it, they're basically upset about it. So suppose we were to look in the emotional model of the sergeant, the one that we've asked this question of what happened here. Well, if we look there, we see the sergeant is upset about the accident. So we use that to then figure out what should be the focus of the question. And we get the right answer, that there was an accident, and he responds with that. So the point here is that basically by bringing together an emotional capability, that actually, it's more than just window dressing, more than, the emotion model is more than just window dressing, more than just having it so that the characters look angry or happy at the right time. It actually can fundamentally affect the cognitive processing that the characters are doing. And so this is actually a good thing to know, and has allowed us to make progress on problems that are otherwise kind of difficult to handle. So let me talk now a little bit about story. When we went to, one of the things that the Army did early on in the history of the ICT was they arranged for us to go on a bunch of greening trips. And contrary to what you might think, greening in this context has nothing to do with the environment. It refers to the fact that the Army wears green. And we saw the simulations that they were doing, and we talked to them about, I was coming with a bunch of folks from Hollywood, and they'd say, story is really critical. And they said, well, we have stories in our simulations. We'd say, no, you don't. You have event lists. And the difference is that in an event list, things just happen. First this happens, then that happens, then the other thing happens. But nobody cares because there's no emotional grab. And in particular, nobody identifies with the characters. They aren't structured in a way that will cause that to happen. There isn't a dramatic arc to the story. And typically, in most military situations, everything's set up so that things go right. But if you think, how boring, right? The things that are interesting is when things go wrong. Lots of ships have successful maiden voyages, but it's the Titanic that gets turned into the movie. Okay, so basically, putting together a good story, and this is something folks in Hollywood really know well, is I think very important to making the simulations and the environments that we create much more compelling. Now, in terms of our simulations, there are a lot of ways that we can use stories. First, the story actually creates a very strong context that limits what people are going to say. And from the standpoint of building an AI system, this is really important because the problems that we're looking at in AI are so difficult and are so broad that if you try to build a general purpose AI system, well, it's just basically forget about it. It's much too difficult. You can't acquire enough knowledge to support that. But if you work within a more limited context, the context that the story provides, then it's feasible. Then you can make progress. So basically, in the Bosnian scenario we just saw, people are definitely going to ask things about, how's the boy, what else is happening around here, all that. But it's unlikely that somebody's going to say, well, what did you think about the Dodgers last season, and how can they really get their act together? That's not going to happen because the story limits the context here. The other thing is the story can create emotional engagement, which increases involvement, and from the standpoint of building a training system, can also, I think, increase learning and improve learning. The other thing we found is that having a socially based scenario like this can help identify new research issues. Most of the research in natural language, in artificial intelligence, and this is a little bit of a broad brush, but I think fairly accurate, has essentially concerned talking on a telephone or over a microphone to a computer about a database problem, like get me 2 tickets to the next Lakers game. in the scenarios we're putting together, the kinds of things that you need to confront are things like multi-party conversations. So there are multiple people out there, and the system needs to know when you're talking to who and when you've stopped talking to one person and start talking to another. So this raises a whole bunch of issues in natural language. Another thing is most of the work in artificial intelligence on natural language has assumed that the communication will be cooperative. So, if I start up with a particular topic, you'll continue on with that topic, and people won't just randomly talk about things. Well, in fact, some of the things we've looked at, one of the scenarios we looked at more recently is a negotiation scenario. And in fact, in negotiation, often you are deliberately uncooperative in your communication. So one of the strategies that people use to avoid a negotiation that they don't want to have is basically to change the topic. So somebody shows up and wants to sell you brushes or something, and you basically want to change the topic. You want to talk about something else. How nice the weather is, and how busy you are, and how you really have to go. So again, we're focusing in on different issues that are important, but it's forced by looking at these stories in a new context. The final thing that's interesting is that the story, if you construct it cleverly, can cover technical limitations. Natural language understanding is still a not completely solved problem, and there will be times when the system won't understand what people are saying. Well, we masked that in one of the systems we just did by deliberately creating one of the characters as a Spanish doctor. And the idea...
What do you want?
The idea is that it will be very plausible that a Spanish doctor wouldn't necessarily understand everything you say and might speak with a kind of funny accent. So it lowers expectations for fluency in English. If you had an American accent for this character, and he said, I don't understand English very well, it wouldn't seem very plausible. But this guy can definitely say, I'm sorry, my English is not so good, and everybody will buy it. So again, by being clever with how you use the scenario in conjunction with the technology, you can actually achieve a better overall result. So I'd like to close here with a couple of remarks about just generally what we've learned from Hollywood. One of the things that's really interesting is that in these simulated environments, as long as you don't violate people's expectations about the environment, people basically want to believe, and they want to be engaged in the story. And this is a really good thing, because it allows you to get by with maybe less than the very best graphics or less than the very best interaction. But one of the things that is critical is when you start the simulation off, you have to set the expectations up so people you're working within a particular world or context, and as long as you don't violate that, things will go, we found, pretty well. You basically don't want to violate the suspension of disbelief that people have. Another thing is that what we found is that when you bring all the elements together, the whole really, in terms of its affect on people, is really greater than the sum of its individual pieces. So having the graphics, having the story, the behavior, they all work together to create this much more interesting experience than if you turn off the sound, for example, all of a sudden the thing seems significantly worse than just having the sound turned off somehow. The final point is that taking a hybrid approach is often the most effective. Instead of, as engineers or as scientists, very often what we do is we take one approach. We say, this is gospel, this is the way we're going to go, and we hammer that approach to death. If you go to Hollywood and you watch a film, what you see is that they actually take multiple approaches to things. So if you're watching even a live action film, some of the film will be live action, some of it will be done with models, some of it will be done with computer graphics, and they pick and choose what's the most appropriate solution for each part. What that's told us is that similarly, some of the characters that we'll put, of these virtual humans, for example, will be very sophisticated AI systems. Some of them may be just automaton, and they're corresponding to sort of the bit players in the environment. And by taking that kind of hybrid approach, you can basically achieve the results in a much more cost-effective manner. Thank you very much for your attention. And we have time for questions. One, right back.
You're talking about integrating all of the different sorts of approaches. How much would you look toward creating a physical endurance or whatever with the individual that is participating rather than necessarily concentrating just on the models that are within the graphics?
By the physical, you mean?
Well, if you're in the Bosnian scenario or whatever else, you got to pack on. You've got a number of things, the heat and everything else.
Right. So that actually is one of the reasons we developed the flat world environment, which is so that people can move through that environment wearing a pack and all of that. And we've actually one of the other places we've put that system in place is at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where it's used for training forward observers for artillery. And in that room, among other things, we have the ability to change the temperature in the room from between about 50 degrees and 100 degrees to create basically, actually trainees have come in to the simulator thinking, okay, it's really hot here at Lawton, Oklahoma, and thank goodness I'm going into the simulator and I'll be able to get cooled off, and it's kind of a surprise when it's 95 degrees in the simulator. So, question?
I recently saw something in a science periodical about how computer scientists are working with all the muscles that are associated with certain emotions, that when you have a certain emotion, you contract certain muscles in your face and other ones relax. And I was wondering if you were using that for your next generation to give not just communications that are facially, communications, but give the facial aspects too.
Yes, yes, that's a very active area of research for us, is basically, and that goes into how you improve the animations that the characters have. We're very much engaged in that, trying to do that, and really both in terms of being able to generate those facial expressions as well as understand them from the input side. So by putting a video camera on somebody, be able to understand, what are they saying to us in addition to what they're saying to us. Yeah, back here.
I just have a couple of comments that you might want to comment back on. One is that it always seems that the public sector is going to be behind the private sector. As long as the Pentagon is putting out RFPs from your Beltway bandits, you're going to get what you pay for, versus Hollywood, who's got the public to spend their money and put it forth in their research. The second comment was, in terms of suspension of disbelief, it seems that we're constantly evolving. Do you remember the old movies with Cary Grant where you'd see the background, and nowadays you look at those and go, oh my God, how could we think that was real? Or even the first Star Wars movie. So
absolutely.
You're never going to be able to, you're always going to be just a step behind, aren't you, for that?
Well, one of the things we're doing is to basically, the area where huge investments are being made in improving the quality of the environment, the virtual environment, is in the game industry. And we have very consciously decided to use game technology as the underlying platform. And essentially, if you think about it, in the computer industry, all of the high-end work on PCs is driven by gamers, because you don't need a really fancy computer to do Word. But you do if you're going to be doing Unreal Tournament 3, for example. And so The simulations we're building now use commercial game engines as the underlying platform to build the work on. And essentially what we're trying to do is to surf that investment that's being made to, and at the same time, identify areas where the game industry is not going, but where for our purposes, for the training purposes and other things, we think is necessary. So the virtual human technology that you see here is actually substantially more sophisticated than what you can see in a typical computer game. But it's built on top of the game engines, so we get benefit from what the game industry has done. And we think that that's really the approach to take, given, as you point out, the limited investments that can be made on the government sector, vice what's going on in the public domain. So basically, instead of trying to do the whole thing with government funds, we build on what's been done in the private sector and then add in additional things that the game industry isn't doing. Yes, back.
Other than funding, could you describe what you think are the technical limitations right now, what you're bumping up against in terms of making this real life, and then where do you think you're going to be in 5 years? Well, so 5-year predictions are always risky. But I can tell you that right now, from one of the big things that we're bumping into is something that's already come up, which is creating much more lifelike and realistic animations. And this particularly focused not so much on running around in a battlefield or something like that, but getting gestures that look realistic and facial expressions that look realistic. So that's one area. Another area is, from the standpoint of the virtual humans, is giving them this ability to perceive what people are doing beyond just what words they're speaking. So being able to understand gestures, to understand facial expressions, to pick up on the prosody in somebody's voice. In other words, how they say things, as well as what they say. Because, for example, if somebody makes a sarcastic remark, but you can't hear the tone of the voice, you'll be very mistaken in how you interpret that. So those are some of the things that, for us right now, are real challenges. Yep.
Oh, I was just going to comment that it seems like a storyline creates a lot of tractability in creating these environments, because when you have a particular character that you're encountering, you can usually expect that events A, B, and C have happened, but event X, Y, and Z has not happened. And so I think a lot of gamers have this down pat, and it kind of makes games boring, that you kind of know that there's a storyline, and if you make a mistake, well, you'll reach a dead end, you'll be able to back up a little bit or something, and then you'll head down the storyline again. I think it's in real contrast to what we see in a holodeck episode or something, where it seems like a person has a lot of control over what happens next. And but I see that as creating a lot of combinatoric problems, that if you could have events A and C but not B yet, then you have to create a character where you take into account many more contingencies, and so you're sort of, that's a mathematical problem that it seems is going to be very hard to overcome.
Yeah, if you take, as has often been taken in a lot of games, a sort of branching story structure kind of approach, where you're here, then you make this decision, and then you have a couple of things, and then that's definitely combinatoric. But the approach we're taking in the virtual humans here is more of what's sometimes called a model-based approach. So basically, the characters have an internal model of what their goals are, what their actions are that are possible things that they can do. And at each point, they're basically figuring out, okay, I'm here now. What are the things that I could do? Which of the best is the best alternative among those? It's sort of like the difference. One way of building a calculator would be to create a huge table of, you write down all the numbers, along one axis and all the numbers along the other, and then you work out what the result is, and you've got this huge table. Okay. The other way is to build a addition algorithm or a multiplication algorithm, and you basically figure it out each time as opposed to pre-enumerating everything. That's roughly kind of the difference. Yeah, I see you. Pat?
Well, I just want to pick up on something that you mentioned in passing, but you didn't show us any actual examples of, which is the system seeing the human's face and maybe reading the human's facial expressions, or okay, where are you going with that?
Left those videos at home. That actually is a very active area of research for us. So I mean, the honest answer is we have some preliminary results for that, but it's still, you know, next year.
Okay. We have time for 2 more questions.
Okay, down here.
Hi, you seem to, you're learning a lot about humanity through these exercises you're doing. I was just wondering about the, you know, it's all seems to be within the context of military applications, and I was just wondering if what's your opinion about, is that the best context for scenarios to learn the most about humanity? And if you could choose any context of scenarios, what context do you think would be the best to discover that?
I think there are a huge number of other applications for this besides just military training. I think it could be used for education. It could be used for telling kids about, for example, what life was like in ancient Rome, to the extent we understand. So basically, you go back, you know, kind of think of it as adventures in time and space. So you go back to ancient Rome, you see what it's like, what street life is like there, how it's like, what it's like to interact with people. You think of this from a standpoint of doing virtual travel. So you visit other places, see other things. I think another use for this, actually something that we're in the process of sort of proposing to the NSF, is to use characters like these as guides in a museum. So basically, you could interact with a character, and they could help enrichen basically the experience you have when you're in the museum. Back here.
All right, 2 more questions. We have contention for the microphone.
Yeah.
Can you describe in a little more detail the capabilities of your Marine Corps deliverable?
So this is something that's going to be used for mission rehearsal or mission typical exercises, training for that. It is going to include some weapon systems and basically laser designators, so that people will be able to do exercises in the environment and interact with bad guys who could be virtual characters, as well as move around the environment. That's the quick explanation. Sir?
How do you make your people respond less logically and more intuitively?
Well, that's a good question. I think actually the intuitive response, you know, intuition is a very funny thing, because arguably intuition is often based on prior experience, and so in many cases it actually is a form of I think a form of a logical response, just couched possibly in different terms.
Thank you. Let's thank our speaker.
Thank you.